Hello everyone, this is Scott Geisler, Business Development Manager with TDWI, and we are here in Chicago for the TDWI World Conference 2011 with Dave Stodder, Director of Research for TDWI's Business Intelligence Practice. And Dave has been kind enough to join us today to discuss a little bit about big data, and specifically deep analytics for big data is the theme of our TDWI Solutions Summit coming up in San Diego, September 25th through the 27th. And Dave, there's been an awful lot of buzz around big data, and could you explain a little bit why there's so much interest in analyzing big data?
Okay, sure, Scott. Great to be here. Well, I think that people have been amassing huge quantities of data for a long time, so in some ways there's nothing new about that. We've been hearing about the Walmarts of the world and Dell and all kinds of retailers in particular that have been amassing terabytes and terabytes of data. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, what is new about this data? Well, it's a different type of data. A lot of it's coming from online sources, customer behavior data. All of a sudden with online retailing and online activity and social networks and things like that, you suddenly have lots of different data streams that could be tremendously valuable to organizations in understanding buying patterns, understanding how customers relate to each other. And that's one thing, is that instead of looking at customers atomically, you're looking at networks of customers, influencers and things like that. Yes. So it's really bringing in a whole new school of analytics to look at that kind of data. So it's really beyond just looking at transactions, say at Target or Walmart.
Sure.
What's happened today. That's very important. It's not like that's not important anymore. It's hugely important, obviously. But the new data types, I think, are what attracting people. And then I think the other is just the sheer velocity of it. There's all sorts of analogies people use. We used to be able to talk about data tsunamis, but maybe that's not quite so correct anymore, considering the tragedies in Japan. But in any case, it is just an incredible rush of data that's coming into organizations, through sensors, through, as I mentioned, online activity. So it's just a relentless flow that really today's technology is struggling to get its arms around.
Sure, absolutely. Would you say that deep analytics for big data would enable a potential company to be more proactive as opposed to reactive with their customer base then, based on what you just said?
Definitely, because I think that, again, that gets to the velocity of it. A lot of the leading edge folks at TDWI for several years now have really been on top of things like real-time analytics, applying insights as quickly as they can to what customers are doing in their stores or online. So in some ways, it's just an extension of that. We're going even beyond that. So I think you're absolutely right that a lot of it is about the idea of being proactive versus reactive.
Sure.
Because obviously the more proactive and predictive, really, is almost a better word, you can get, the more you can anticipate certainly difficulties, but you can also anticipate where customers are going and get there, so you can provide the best offers, best pricing. We're really in an age of dynamic pricing now with a lot of industries, so pricing itself is something that's sort of subject to the flow of customer interest in a certain product. I think it's things like that we're heading into.
Great, fantastic. So what makes big data different, Dave, in terms of from what people have already been doing with large BI and data warehousing? How is it different now?
Well, as I mentioned, I think there are a lot of organizations, I shouldn't say a lot, but I think the leading edge organizations have already been applying, terabytes and terabytes of data to understanding customer behavior. But it's the mixture of data types, whereas before you might have had just transaction data and using really business intelligence on top of everything to understand buying patterns, where profits are coming from, share of wallet, those kinds of things. It really can be quantified very easily. Well, all that time there was this whole other source of data, some would say 80% of the data out there, that is not easily quantified. It's really about the conversation that's going on out there. As I mentioned, influencers. How do you do that? So some of it is around, okay, now we're getting to the point where we can begin to quantify what's going on there. And that's where the analytics can play a huge role.
Sure.
So I think that's a big difference between traditional data warehousing at the leading edge and what we have with big data. And so it's a lot about the data types, as I mentioned, the flow of the data coming in. And I think the other is that really is who needs the data.
Sure.
Whereas it used to be just really at maybe the top levels of the organization, or at least in lines of business. Now we're getting to where decisions need to be made in contact centers, call centers, anywhere where you've got customer touch points. And so it's really throughout organizations. And so I think one of the things that really distinguishes a lot of the companies that are going to be at the Solutions Summit are really, it's incredible. You really see this transformation of sort of IT over here and the business over here, to where you really have analytics beginning to blend into everything the business is doing. And so, and to the point where you really have almost new kinds of businesses, such as a Zynga, which even Ken Rudin, who will be speaking at our conference, would say is really an analytics company masquerading as a gaming company.
Sure.
So it's really, that's how far they've come.
That's pretty interesting. The program for the Solution Summit sounds pretty amazing. There are going to be numerous case studies from companies like Zynga, who you just mentioned, the makers of Farmville, as well as ComScore, Kelley Blue Book, and more. Tell us a little bit about some of these case studies and what the attendees of the Solution Summit will learn from them.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, ComScore, I've known Ken Rudin for years. He's always involved in something pretty adventurous when it comes to large quantities of data, so it's really going to be great to have him speaking at our conference. He's a very eloquent and instructive speaker. I think people will learn a lot from his experience at Zynga, where he is now, and where they're doing things with Farmville and Mafia Wars. I think they're also, and really their whole game development process is really tied up in the behavioral analytics that they're picking up off the internet.
Sure.
So there's really no time of the day or night that they're not looking at their data streams coming in and figuring out how better to serve their customers with the games.
Sure.
Try to figure out better profitability levels, things like that. ComScore, we're really excited to have ComScore there, because ComScore, in many ways, you could say, is one of the founding companies of big data, I would say.
Absolutely.
Because they're really, their whole business is really tracking and measuring and analyzing activity online, and now increasingly on mobile platforms too. They're getting into that. And so advertising companies, media companies, all sorts of companies really depend on ComScore to understand where to place their investments online in terms of advertising or marketing programs and things like that. So they have more than 20 billion rows of data coming in daily.
Wow.
That they have to analyze.
That's amazing.
And then Kelley Blue Book, a company that I'm sure a lot of folks have dealt with when they buy cars, such as yourself, Scott. I don't know if you went to Kelley Blue Book to.
As a matter of fact, I did do some checking. Yep.
So, well, I've done the same thing. It's a very useful site. And but again, Dan Engel, he's going to talk about how that company has really transformed itself. They realized that to really serve their customers, they had to be very prompt with vehicle evaluations. They had to do a better job in terms of forecasting, and then relaying that information to their customer base. And so it's critical for them to be really churning through very large quantities of data and behavioral data all the time.
Absolutely. So when a lot of people think of big data, Dave, they think of social networks and online media, which you touched on. How much of the big data buzz is about data coming from those sources? Is deep analytics for big data mostly about getting intelligence from social networking activity, or is it more than that?
Well, I think it is that, and then it's more than that.
Okay.
So I would say initially it was really about what LinkedIn is doing, what maybe Zynga was doing, what Yahoo was doing.
Sure.
Google. Google and Yahoo have been incredibly important in the development of a lot of the technology behind what's new about big data, such as Hadoop and MapReduce and things like that, and the usage of these technologies that really either stretch the relational database paradigm or really go around it in some respects.
Sure.
So yes, I think it's definitely about social media data. And then the other thing about that is that it's no longer just the Yahoos and LinkedIns who are engaging in social media and are concerned about it.
Right.
It's really hard now probably to find any company that isn't really thinking a lot about what their brand reputation is online.
Absolutely.
As we've talked about, customer behavior, buying patterns, things like that. So I think it's that. But I think it's important to say that it's not just social media. There's sensor data. We will have an extraordinary case study on the program about quality assurance that's being done robotically and then picking up sensor data. We'll have other things on the program. In fact, our keynote, Mark Demers, is going to talk about data streams, particularly in the financial services area. I mean, really, financial services has really been critical to complex event processing and stream processing. And so that kind of technology, which used to be very narrowly applied on Wall Street, also is starting to be seen, in other areas, both in the private sector and public sector, if you think about the government as well.
Sure.
So I think that the big data issue is really extended beyond social media, but then we can't forget that what is going on in social media is, really amazing.
Sure.
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
Well, Dave, thank you so much for your insights and your communicating with us and sitting down and taking the time to be with us here.
My pleasure.
If you have liked what you've seen and heard here and have your curiosity piqued and would like to learn more, or perhaps see some of these case studies in person, please consider our Deep Analytics for Big Data event coming up in September in San Diego. It promises to be a fantastic event. Our own Dave will be running it, and I think you'll find a great amount of value should you decide to attend. Thanks again, Dave. We appreciate your time.
Great. Hope to see everyone there.
All right.